Hey, I'm going to make a video which I don't often make, which is related to my profession, which is teaching. That's my background. This isn't really related to the last video which I made for Buckland teachers. And I should say everything in this video is entirely personal opinion. You don't have to agree with me, and you might have other ideas, and that's fine. It's solely personal opinion. I feel prompted to make this though because I've just come across two feedback comments that I've received on another video entitled Grammar Nazis, and it's sort of a satirical look at the idea of basically people who take grammar very, very seriously. Often teachers, but not exclusively teachers. And basically these two individuals were, what I was saying there basically was that I understand where this is coming from. I understand the frustration that exists against so-called grammar Nazis, because to a lot of people they're bordering on control freaks. I'll get into that in a second, but basically I replied and I said I'm an English teacher and I agree that there is such a thing. And I got two very smug replies. One of them was, I'm surprised teachers are allowed to comment on the internet. Now, that's clearly ridiculous. Teachers have as much right to talk and communicate on the internet as anybody else. What that individual was probably getting at is issues like communication with students, or anything that would be considered unethical. That would be, for example, if an adult teacher has an inappropriate relationship online with an underage student. But in terms of actually voicing opinions online, the way I see it is, so long as you're not slandering any institution, i.e. your employers, which would be a pretty stupid thing to do because you would end up losing your job. But, you know, the idea that you cannot have an opinion just because of your profession, I think is pretty absurd. It's a bit like if you are a police officer, and you have as much right to have a view on any given subject, so long as it doesn't compromise the work that you do. So for example, if you come out with racist comments or a racist tirade, that's going to be problematic if you are in a public service job. Likewise, as a teacher, if I was to make a racist video, which I wouldn't do anyway because I'm not a racist, but if I was, that would compromise my position because it would indicate that I couldn't work with people from whatever minority I would be attacking. That's the logic. But what this guy was just saying was a sweeping statement like teachers shouldn't be commenting online. So that really bugged me because it's rubbish. The other comment was a very sort of smug reply that, oh, I bet you're not a real English teacher because your statement is full of grammatical errors and so on. And this guy or girl came out with a very sort of smug reply, because what I was doing was saying, basically I do understand why people get frustrated with those who obsess over grammar, even though I am a teacher myself. So I thought it would be appropriate to make this video to sort of explain what I'm getting at, and this is not to those individuals. I couldn't care less what they think, but it's more for a generic sort of thing. I don't actually think I'm the best communicator in the world. I'll be quite candid about that. Sometimes I'm reflecting on something, and when I make these videos I reflect on what I'm saying. Very, very, very rarely that I sit down and plan what I'm going to say. I just speak from the heart and from the mind. So sometimes I do procrastinate a little bit over my wording. Sometimes I slur my wording, and partly that is because I suffer from mouth ulcers. They're quite painful, and sometimes that's why I maybe slur my wording a little bit. There are certain things I believe that are necessary for an English teacher, for any teacher, but particularly for an English teacher. Patience. You need to have patience to maybe handle a rowdy class, to try to educate students, have the patience to keep maybe repeating things if they're not listening the first time. That goes without saying. Patience is a very, very important thing for any teacher. Obviously understanding the subject that you're talking about, that goes without saying. If you're going to teach people something, you need to know what you're talking about and make sure that you're giving them accurate information. Balance. You don't want to be a sort of, let's say, party animal. You don't want to be seen as an entertainer. So you do need to be disciplined enough, and strict would be the wrong word, but let's say assertive enough to exert control when you need to. If that means raising your voice, it's important. What I done, I should say, is when I had days where the class was being a bit rough, and I had some classes that were harder than others, I did get quite angry, but that was actually more effective. If you are cranky all the time, then they just think you're a cranky person. If you're easygoing most of the time, then suddenly you lose your temper. It actually has more of an effect in my experience, because you're taken back by that. It's a good thing because it shows that you are approachable, but at the same time you're not going to be a walkover. But having said that, you don't want to be too assertive and too sort of rigid that you would be off-putting to students. Now, I believe I got the balance just right. I don't think I'm the world's best teacher, but I do think I have certain skills that are required from a teacher. And I have personally been told by students that after helping them, their exam grades have improved. So I know this isn't just a vain thing on my part. I've seen the evidence of it. Having a rapport with students is very important. If you have a teacher who just comes in and they do it as a sort of chore, like it's their job, and another day at the office, if a teacher looks tired, if they look drained, if they look stressed out, that will have an impact on the students as well. So actually this job takes a lot of energy, and you do need to have a very outgoing sort of personality, and you do need a lot of energy. Anyone that thinks teaching is easy needs to experience it, because it's not. But you know, I really take a dim view of this sort of attitude that, well, what I wanted to get at here actually in this was the whole subject of grammar, because it's something that comes up quite occasionally, and this whole idea of being a grammar Nazi. If you're not familiar with the term, basically it's a negative, it's a pejorative, which is negative, sort of sarcastic. It's kind of the idea that there are people out there so obsessed by grammar that they're sort of control freaks. The tiniest grammatical error they will focus on and they will obsess over. Now, in a classroom setting, this is okay, because it's a job to do that, especially if they're preparing students for an exam, or the students are doing an assignment. That goes without saying. You're a teacher, your job is to teach, including amending errors. But this is something where I have a slightly, perhaps, controversial view. But I don't care, because I believe teaching, like any field, should have diversity of opinions. I don't believe that grammar is the most important thing in terms of everyday communication. I'll say that again. I don't believe that grammar is the most important thing in terms of everyday communication. The way you would teach a student to write formal grammar is all very well for an exam, and it is good to teach them for someone who is learning English as a language. Also, as a teacher, of course I will notice if someone is making major grammatical errors, and I do think that digital technology can impact communication. I have seen messages online that are so awful in terms of the basic grammar that it is cringeworthy, that you think, whoa, this person really can't communicate, because it's not just one or two mistakes. It's like the whole thing is, you know, shortened words, complete lack of punctuation, completely just not really good grammar at all. But what I would say is, online, I really don't think it's necessary to have perfect grammar. What is necessary is that you can be understood. If you're trying to get a point across, and this goes for anything in life, if you're trying to get a point across, it needs to be audible enough that people can comprehend it. And that's actually part of the feedback I gave to this moron, that he or she understood every word I was saying, and they knew they did. Generally, I never have problems with communication. I can honestly say hand to heart, I've never had a problem where someone doesn't understand me. I have abundant experience speaking to people, personally, who don't speak English as a first language, and their comprehension of what I'm saying generally is very good. And they have personally told me that they can understand me better than some non-teachers or people who are native speakers that what they mean is other British people, basically. And that's not an insult to other British people, it's just what they told me. So that surely to me shows that the most important thing is comprehension, it's not grammar. Because when I communicate with people, I don't use perfect grammar. I communicate, well, okay, if I'm speaking to someone who doesn't have English as a first language, I'm not going to be talking to them the way I speak in this video. I'll be speaking a little bit slower, a little bit clearer, because I assume that most of the people watching my videos are from English-speaking countries. The point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, grammar is important, but it is not the most important thing in every single context. It's really not. I guess those comments kind of took me back because I took them quite personally, but because they were an attack on me as a teacher. And these are people who don't know me, they don't know my experience, they haven't seen the response from my students. And they're basing their bullshit on one comment. Incidentally, my keyboard is having some problems right now, so it inadvertently leaves out letters and so on. It's a nuisance, but that's just the way it is. I'm not saying that grammar isn't important, it is, but if you're the sort of person who obsesses over it, you need to be aware that that comes across as quite arrogant. Because the vast majority of people do not care, quite frankly. The number one thing in day-to-day communication is comprehension, understanding what the other person is saying, and being able to communicate in an effective way. Clearly there are situations where people's grammar is so bad that, yeah, it's valid to say something, it's valid to say, look, I don't understand what you're saying. But what bothers me is some of these smug people who know damn well what people are saying, but they're just choosing to be prudish, and they're just choosing to be control freaks. As a teacher, what I believe is most important is connecting with students, having a rapport with students, building confidence. Yes, improving the standard of English, of course, but actually, if you're teaching day-to-day English as opposed to formal exam English, if you're teaching daily communication, then what is more effective? Informing students as to how people really communicate, or how text communication works? I think the former. I'm not going to tell a Chinese student, for example, to speak completely the Queen's English if they're going to go to a local market, because that is not how people communicate. I'll teach them basics of etiquette and so on, but this is the thing. Sometimes local dialects are important, sometimes it is important to teach those things. Now, I can see a problem if a dialect completely replaces you know, understanding and context, and sometimes, you know, some people do sort of take the view that their dialect is right. We have to state something as it is, so a dialect is not formal English, it's not. But I don't think there's anything wrong with a dialect so long as it's clear to people. I think you can have a dialect which is still understandable. I don't really use any dialects, but if a student asks me about that, I'm going to tell them. I don't think it's a bad thing that they would know something like that, especially if they're living in a specific city for 2 years or so. So, the final message I'd like to get out here is, I'm not telling other teachers what to do, and I'm not saying that grammar isn't important, it is. If I'm preparing students for an exam, or for an assignment, or for paperwork whereby grammar is required, of course I will teach them formal grammar. Of course I will. But in terms of daily communication, what I'm saying is that is not the most important thing. And some of these grammar Nazis need to just back off and realise that actually they're in the minority. Now, when it comes to communication, the most important thing is that more people understand you. So if you're in a minority with this, regarding imposing very rigid grammar, then clearly you're not doing something right. You're missing the point. Let me know your thoughts. I'm not really interested in back and forth arguments with other teachers about, you know, what makes a good teacher and so on. I don't want to get so personal. I'm just trying to make the point that this is about comprehension. for me, that is the most important thing that a teacher can teach a student, is comprehension and his usage of English. Now, any honest person will admit that in English, or probably in any other language, the language that you speak on a daily basis is not the formal version of the language. It just isn't. So I think it's a mistake actually for English teachers to focus so much on formal grammar. Yes, it is important. I'm not saying it's not. All I'm saying is that when they focus on that as if it's the only thing that matters, I think that's misguided. I know teachers who are very good with grammar, they're very good at teaching that, but actually their whole approach is wrong, because they're too formal, they're too rigid, and that just makes them hard to approach by students, especially students in China, who tend to be quite shy. It is very important to build up a rapport with students in that regard. Okay, thank you for watching.